Hello and welcome. Um, I'm talking today about the class action as it is right now. We're currently 14 days out. It's the 10th of February, and 24th is when we will be in court to start with. Um, I want to talk about the issue of evidence that we've been going through over the last little while and what's been happening today and yesterday. So, over October and November, um, the banks have had said that a lot of our documents that we'd filed after the original founding affidavit, answering affidavit, replying affidavit, should not be admitted. And we had a long fight, which took me 2 months of basically doing that at least half to three quarters of the time. And the judge decided at the end of the day to exclude all our evidence that came after the initial filings, which was a bit surprising, but we can go with that. We've still got enough evidence to show that the banks have been selling people's houses for much less than they're worth and as a last resort, just not as much as we used to have. However, what I've done is I've done a little bit of digging in the last little while, in the last few days, and we've found, and this is going to get a little bit complicated, but it's also a little bit good, that the Zietsman affidavit was not one of these supplementary affidavits that was filed after. It was actually part of the initial founding, answering, replying set that is automatically admitted. Now, the Zietman affidavit, if you don't know already, is an affidavit that includes something like 24,000 examples of the banks selling people's houses for less than they're worth. It also answers another question that the banks amazingly put to the court, saying that it's not possible to establish prices for houses, and so that we can say, okay, the bank owes Mr. X for 500,000 because their house was worth $1 million then, and the bond was 500,000, and they sold it for 500,000. Just to give you an easy example, they say no, it's impossible to establish these things. It's too long ago. We can't do it. But our affidavit from Zietsman, which analyzes the bank's own data given to us by the NCR back when the NCR wanted to sue the banks, rightly, quite a long time ago. So it's clear that it's possible to establish these amounts. It's clear that there are thousands and thousands, 24,000 there, but totally more than 100,000, maybe more than 200,000, but we say 100,000 to be conservative, houses that have been sold, almost all for less than they were worth. Nothing like the 90 to 100% you would get in, say, South Korea, Germany, and many countries around the world. So, and it's not to do with being a rich country. Ghana says no less than 80%. So that is the evidence that we've put before the courts, and then the NCRs come. I think it was 2001 to say no, that's our information. You can't use it. And we won that case before Judge Valley. I was arguing for the people of South Africa, the people that have had their houses sold, and we're very proud to have won that case. Then the banks are still not happy, so they say, but this document's not been admitted. It's a supplementary affidavit, and they made that big fuss, not just about that document, but about many documents, and they managed to get them all excluded. But I did a bit of burrowing, and in my research for the class action, because I'm doing virtually nothing else at the moment, despite the fact it doesn't pay me any money, or hardly any. So I found, wait, the replying affidavits. So that's part of the initial bundle of documents that you file to start with. So you file your founding affidavit, That's your starting off one, where we sue the banks and we say, we're suing you. Then they come back with their answering affidavits, 4 of them, 200 pages long each. And back in 2021 or something, I had to spend hours and hours, days, weeks, going through them and answering with our replying affidavits. Now, in these replying affidavits, I've now found, to start with once, and now I've found already in the last 2 days, 3 times where we attached that Zeetzman affidavit with the 24,000 examples to the replying affidavit. So it was part of the initial papers. And I've said this to the banks, and they're very annoyed, and they call me names, and they say it's an abusive process, and I'm in contempt, and that they're going to do all kinds of things to me because they don't take this as a rational thing. They try and intimidate me, and that's the way they work. They try and get costs against me for 5 million rands, at least for all their costs, and they've asked the judge to award costs against me personally. That's the way they operate. They're not operating on a kind of fair, rational level, which tells us that we can't trust our banks. That's not what they should be doing. They should be saying, we're really sorry, we've made a big mistake over many years, how can we compensate the people? And if anything, you'd expect them to be saying, okay, we'll compensate everyone, but look, we're not going to compensate you 100%. That's what you'd expect from them. But they're not even going to that degree. They're saying, no, we are not responsible at all. We're going to fight this. And of course, they do this regularly, and most people can't afford to keep going with them. And so they drop out. But that is an unethical strategy. Which brings me to my next key theme, which is we need legislation. This has nothing to do with the class action, right? Nothing to do with the class action, separate issue. But the class action tells us that the banks are not to be trusted. You cannot trust the banks to do the right thing without law. And most other countries in the world have forced their banks to do the right thing. They've said this is the law. And that's what we need, because we've left our banks kind of to be responsible for themselves, and they've let us down. So we've said, okay, we'll let you decide when you're going to take somebody's house away and when you're not. And they have done it to a hugely greater and a hugely more negative and a hugely more culpable degree than the rest of the world. So we actually need legislation. So what you need to do as well as everything to do with the class action is to write to your MP, to write to the office of the president and say, we need legislation to regulate our bank's home loan processes. Because I can tell you, although we've put in, the movement have put in new legislation in 2017, rules of court technically speaking, they have helped, but they haven't solved the problem. They haven't solved the banks not selling as a last resort problem. I see 1,000 people probably a year, either socially or as official appointments, who say to me, no, the bank, we've got enough money to pay, but the bank still wants to sell our house. We've got somebody that's going to guarantee our bond, but the bank still wants to sell our house. There's been no securitization program for people that are in difficulty. There's only pristine bonds being sold off on securitization programs. So the banks have got a responsibility under JAFTA, the case of JAFTA, which you can Google on Safley. Safley, JAFTA will get you this case. Look at paragraph 59. It says the banks are obligated to use creative means, obligated to be creative, to find new ways not to sell houses. They have not done that. They have kept doing what they've always done, if not worse. So I see lots of people that can afford to pay their house now. I'm not saying that the banks can never repossess a house. I'm just saying they do it far, far too often. And I see terrible things. And after that, you just think, no, this is an evil system. We can't continue with that. And when I say an evil system, I'm saying something that I believe in, and that it's truth in public interest. If the bank sued me and said, how can you say our system is evil? I can say, look, here's the evidence. It's the truth, and it's in the public interest for people to know. So that's the carry on from this. It's not just the class action, it's also what do we do next? And that is talk to the political nation. And I found the political nation, for all their faults, and they have many, quite sympathetic to us on this. I found that many political parties, from the left to the right, have either officially or unofficially expressed their support. And so, apart from the class action, we also need to focus on that. But for now, in terms of the evidence, the banks are telling us that there's no way this has been excluded. They were so happy, obviously, when they got that judgment, but it hasn't been excluded because it wasn't part of the things that were excluded. And I found now, just yesterday, going through the replying affidavits, we had to do funny things, convert them to PDF, to Word, so we could search them and stuff. But we finally found the places where the replying affidavits referred to an attachment that was the Zietsman affidavit. It was an attachment of that, and then the banks have come back with all kinds of arguments, saying, "Oh, but this was filed before the replying affidavit." Well, yes. Well, that means it can't be a supplementary affidavit. They're filed after the replying affidavit. That was their complaint. And other various things which I've responded to. So I will now need to put together heads of argument, particularly for that issue. Now, just to give you some more timelines, I had to put in my heads of argument. Heads of argument are basically your legal case. So you've filed your factual case and what we've been referring to. You're founding, you're answering, and you're replying. The bank's doing the answering. And then quite often lots of supplementary affidavits as well, but in this case ours haven't been admitted, but it's not a train crash. So I had to put mine in last Tuesday. They only gave me 2 weeks or something to do it. Don't quote me on that exact figure, but it was very short time periods, but less short than they might have been. We actually kind of complained and said, look, I haven't got enough time to do this. I'm only one person. The banks have got 4 banks with maybe at least 6 or 7 staff on this from time to time. And some really good people that have got a lot of experience, of course. So it's difficult to fight against that kind of 25-1 type situation. But sometimes that's what you have to do. So they now have to file their heads, their legal arguments, 4 of them, one for each bank that's still left. ABSA, FNB, Nedbank, and Standard Bank, by Friday the 13th of February, which is also the Ides of March, I think, when Julius Caesar was assassinated. So if you're a superstitious person, I don't know what you think of that, but it's just quite ironic, symbolic. But then from the 13th, I don't have to reply at all after that. But courts usually appreciate it if you give them your arguments as clearly in advance as possible. So as I read through these 4 heads of argument, which I'm sure, given that they've got some really hot, expensive lawyers on it, we'll have some very good arguments, which I'll have to think about. But there's a saying in law that says you're only as good as your case. And at the end of the day, there's been a huge injustice here. There's been 100,000 people, houses at least, which means what? Maybe 3 or 4 people per house. 300,000, 400,000 people. And then if you go back from 1994, if you talk about the injustice and not what we can sue for, that went back to 1907 or so in Joburg, and back to 1965 or so in Cape Town and Durban. So this injustice has been going on for a very long time. And it would be a terrible indictment on South African justice if something was not done about this. But there might be twists and turns. I'm not going to predict the course of the trial. I hope it's fair. I think it will be. If we succeed, then we'll go to trial. But if we succeed on this, then we're quite solid. If we don't succeed, then we'll have the option of appeal, which we'll have to consider at that time, to the High Court, then to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and finally to the Constitutional Court. If the banks lose, it's unlikely they'll appeal. They don't usually. But it's not entirely unusual for the people of South Africa to have to go to higher courts in order to get justice. But I'm hoping that's not going to be the case, that we're going to get justice here in the High Court. So that tells you what's been happening. It clears up perhaps a few of the media stories recently which haven't been entirely correct. And I'm sure I'll also be in the media quite soon talking further about this. But this is what's been happening in the last 2 or 3 days, and this is what's about to happen in the next few days. Thank you, and I'll speak to you soon.